If you've ever wondered when or how to start AAC with your child, or if you're worried that using a communication device might delay speech, this episode is for you. Today, I'm talking to Marisa Garcia, a speech language pathologist who not only works with autistic students, but also used AAC with her own autistic son, who went from nonverbal to thriving in school. We'll cover practical tips, common mistakes, and how to make communication easier at home, even if your child is resistant at first. Get ready for some incredible insights and actionable advice. Hi, Marisa. Welcome to Embracing Autism.
Hello, thank you for having me on your show. I'm honored to be a guest.
I am so excited because AAC is something we're not super familiar with. We haven't personally had to use it with our kids, but I know a lot of our audience members do. So this is going to be a great way to talk about it. So to start off, could you share a little bit more about your journey, both as a speech language pathologist and a mom of an autistic child? Because I know you have kind of a unique lens into both worlds. And then how did those roles shape your understanding of autism and communication?
So when my son was younger, he was nonverbal, as you mentioned, and at times it was challenging to know what he wanted. So I have navigated through the meltdowns, taking him to all of his therapies and supporting him through school. And as a speech language pathologist, the advantage that I had is that I knew early on that my son would benefit for early childhood intervention. So I knew which direction to go. And I was also able to start working on communication at an early age because I know communication is essential. And as far as how his autism has shaped me, it helps me understand autism so much more, understand my students that I work with, and most importantly, understand my parents because I can identify with them and I know how they feel and what they're going through.
I have definitely noticed in our experience with teachers, early interventionists, therapists, I've always noticed that there's a pattern that the people who have some sort of relationship to autism in their personal life tend to be way better at what they do. I think it's just like when you are really in the trenches and you really understand autism from a first perspective, I don't know, to me, you end up being like way better at your job personally.
Well, I agree because I knew a lot about autism before I had my son, and it was a specialty of mine. But it's just different because I have gone through that journey with him, and I can understand and empathize with parents and just understand how they feel, and on so many different levels. To going to pick him up and gripping the steering wheel because I'm thinking, oh great, what am I going to hear today? You know, when people feel it's necessary to tell you every single thing your child even thought about doing, I could identify with that. I could see from both sides. I could see from an SLP perspective, but I can also see from the parent perspective that I'm human. And sometimes it could be overwhelming.
I can totally relate to the gripping the handle
Yeah,
thing.
it's like,
That's
what are they
how
going to
we
say
feel
today?
like, yeah, we feel like that with school too. Every day we're like, are we going to get a phone call today? Is it going to be another note? But you also mentioned that your son had developmental delays with
Yes.
other areas as well. I think prior to this, you had mentioned to me that you said, I think he had issues walking, like delayed
Yes.
walking. And so he had to start therapy at just 1 year old. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that and the early signs you saw because we have two autistic kids, and one of them also had not only delayed walking, but she never was able to crawl. And so we shared a similar journey to that. So I was just wondering, what early signs did you see, and what do you think that other parents should look out for?
Well, as far as the early signs, like, with your child's pediatrician, they talk about the developmental milestones. And it's like, I learned the biggest thing I learned is if they are delayed with just one milestone, that could be an indicator of other issues. So for me, it was a delay with the walking because when he was one, he wasn't walking. He was delayed with his crawling. So it was more so gross motor. But as far as the speech, he wasn't babbling. He was delayed with that as well as the gross motor. And I just say that if a child is delayed with any of those milestones, definitely talk with a pediatrician and see if you should get them in for early intervention. Because for me, I took him in for therapy at one, thinking we just needed to address the walking and with the OT and the PT. And I thought, okay, we could just get those muscles strong and he's going to be walking. But boy, no, there were a lot of other things. He actually, we were working on that before I realized that he had autism, and even before I saw the significant delays with the communication. And so that's why I learned, if you see any delay, get early intervention. Don't wait, because I went just for the walking, and actually he had to have braces. He wore SMO braces on his ankles for 4 years, and now he doesn't have to wear them, but he did wear them for 4 years to help strengthen his muscles, in addition to the extensive OT and all the therapies that he had.
Yeah, our journey was a little bit reversed from that in the sense that we got into early intervention first. I kind of sensed that something was off, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. So we called them in for an evaluation. And then at that time, that's when we started realizing that she had all these delays because our kid, she was our first kid. You know, you don't really know what's normal at that time when you're like a first time parent. So we didn't really know that anything was significantly off until then. And then she had the same issues with the walking delays, and she had the same issues with, well, what we ultimately found out was hypotonia. So for her, it was
That's
more
what my
of a
son
low.
has.
Oh
That's
yeah,
what my son had hypotonia, had the low tone, exact
yeah,
same.
yeah. That's what ours
And I
had, the
think that
hypotonia.
also, played a role in his delayed speech, because, as explained to me, the hypotonia does affect your growth. But see, when you talk, those are muscles too, and so I
Yep.
think the hypotonia also played a role in why he was delayed with talking.
And that's actually why I was bringing it up because I was just going to ask you with our daughter, she had a delay in speech as well. And she also had a delay with eating. And we realized through that process that it was the muscles in her face were weakened because of the hypotonia. So she couldn't chew effectively. She couldn't keep food in her mouth. Her jaw would kind of hang open and food would fall out. So I was wondering from like an SLP perspective, what is it that I guess you look for when you see things like that? Like, is that something that's more OT? Is that something that's more ST? Like, where does that really fall?
And so that falls within speech therapy and occupational therapy. And when you said that, I had forgotten about this, but with my son, it wasn't so much the food. He drooled profusely. He was wearing bibs long after other kids. Like you said, when it's your first child, you don't know, that's normal to you. I will never forget when I took him to this special like preschool for 2-year-olds, and I looked around and none of the other students had bibs. And that was my first reality check, like, wow, my son is different, because that was my reality. So he drooled profusely. So that, add to what you're saying, OT and speech and language work with oral motor exercises. And what the OT have recommended for me, ditch the sippy cups, and we started using straws, because that helps strengthen those muscles. And it was amazing, within a week or two he stopped drooling. And so you have to kind of get, oral motor therapy kind of can get kind of controversial, but definitely with the straws and things like that, I had order oral motor therapy tools. And when I would brush his teeth, I had different things I would use on his lips, and I would use to increase that sensation. But the biggest thing that helped was the straw, because that helped strengthen up those muscles, because he drooled so much. And I didn't even realize that it was excessive until I was around the other kids and they weren't wearing bibs, and my son still was.
Yeah, I'm getting all these flashbacks now because ours also pocketed food and there was all sorts of other things associated with that. So I wanted to also touch base a little bit. Throughout that process, it sounds like at some point in time you introduced a communication device. I
Hmm.
think you had said this all started when he was like, what, around 1 years old?
Yes.
So when
Hmm.
was the communication device introduced?
So that was introduced when he was 2. And the one thing I like to point out is you have low tech AAC, which is picture cards, choice boards, functional sign language, and you have high tech. So I actually started with the low tech when he was 1. I started with the simple signs for more, all done, and eat. And I actually used to have him sign more to answer yes and no questions, because he didn't nod or shake his head. And so I would say, ask him a question, I would say, show me more, so that he could communicate. I also created picture cards, because it was a lot easier, because I do it all the time. But I created picture cards for my son, and it's important with the low tech to provide your child with choices. And so I would give him choices for breakfast, lunch, dinner, his preferred toy, or where he wanted to go. Once he mastered that picture exchange, that's when I moved to the communication device. But you want to make sure you master that first. I didn't go straight to that. I did all of those other avenues avenues. And once I saw that he had that understanding, then I did. And actually, I had an iPad and I downloaded a communication app. I will never forget when I had his name on there and he pressed it and he was able to say his name. And I'll never forget the look on his face, the joy. And I said, "That's your voice." And I still remember, I get chills. I still think of that, but him being able to tell me I love you for the first time using the device. So that's the important thing. You can introduce those low techs, but you don't want to go straight to that high tech. You have to set that foundation first and know that they have that understanding before you move to something else.
In your experience, I also want to know what has been kind of like the success rate with introducing that, because I know like for us, our middle child, the youngest at the time, she was the type that basically just plateaued and just never talked, never tried to babble. Like she seemed basically mute, like she didn't make any noise, nothing. And so we basically had to start with pictures and things like that. It wasn't working, so we tried sign language, and she caught on to sign language way faster than anything else. So we were actually able to get her to do signs. Now she speaks, so it's been like 6 years of a journey, and now she's verbal. But we had a really hard time introducing that. So I was just wondering, like, what do you kind of do in those cases? Are there kids that don't take on to it?
There are, and I think the biggest thing I've learned is that communication has to be meaningful for them. That's the key. Once they see that it's meaningful for not just like requesting, which a lot of people say, I want to drink, I want to eat. It's so much more than that. Once they see that it acknowledges them, acknowledges how they feel, that's that buy-in. Like one of the stories I remember, my son, and I had gone to the art museum. He was, I think, 2, and he had the device and he was able, saying, "I want to go." And I didn't pack up everything and leave, but I was able to acknowledge him and to say, "Well, I know you want to go, but we can't go right now." So it's a complex thing for some children. It's that buy-in. They see the purpose of communication, but if it's not meaningful to them, then sometimes they could be slower to use some of these strategies.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that happening with our kids. Even after they started picking up language, now it's like expressing appropriate language. So we have the same issue now, just in a different way. So I was wondering, for those out there who are listening, there's some parents who are extremely familiar with AAC, and then there's some who have never heard of it. Could you define what that is and how it works?
Yes. So AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And what that is it's just an alternative form of communication that allows people to communicate their wants, needs, feelings, make comments, just a way to interact. And so, like I mentioned, you have the low tech and you have the high tech. It even includes like visual schedules and choices. So it's just an overall like umbrella of different ways that you can help your child communicate.
How do you know when your child is ready to go from like the low tech version to that high tech version?
Well, when they are able to make those choices, when you can increase from, you start with 1, you go to 2, you go to 3, when they are able to do that, when they're able to do that, I guess the word sufficiently, and you see that they make that connection, then you can start introducing a communication device. And another thing that I wanted to mention that I did with my son that was very helpful is that whenever my son would go to a new place or a non-desirable place like the dentist office, what I did is I took pictures of everything ahead of time. I would take pictures with him in the activity. I would go over it with him over and over with him because he had anxiety about that. That could be a form of AAC. I did that all the time. And if it's a situation where, let's say, you can't go to the place ahead of time and take pictures, we went shoe shopping, again, a non-preferred task. I downloaded pictures outside the store and inside the store. And I think that's key because what I've learned with my son being a visual learner, verbally telling an autistic child, this is where you're going, most of the time that's not enough. And so I did want to point that out because I found that to be a game changer because he had so much anxiety. And for him to be able to see that and process that helped. And he would be in his car seat in the back seat, just repeatedly going over the pictures and going over the pictures. And so I think that that's also a form of AAC.
That's definitely something that we kind of noted with our middle child too. When she was like pretty nonverbal, we had a hard time communicating like family members with her. So like she couldn't even like she couldn't say mom or dad, mama, nothing. And so what we did is I put together kind of like a children's board book, and I put up each page was like a picture of each family member, and then I would write like a little rhyme about them on the other page. So then every day I would read it to her and kind of like the sing-songy rhyme. And then eventually she was able to say like the name, like Papa. If they had a long name, I would always like shorten it. So I always made like nicknames too. But I definitely noticed what you're saying here, that like sometimes having that real life kind of picture helps a lot more than like the cartoon stick figure or something like that. I don't know if that's been your experience, but at least for us,
Definitely.
yeah, right? You've noticed that
I
too?
like to well, I like to use a lot of real pictures even when I have made tons of visual schedules and pictures and things, but I personally like the real pictures. Even when I use Board Maker a lot, but even when I use that, I would do a search for like the real pictures or look for pictures that like look like the students themselves use, because I personally find it to be more meaningful. And I also did something similar. I had an iPad app that had the visual pictures, and I recorded like, I can't believe how similar this is. So I actually recorded little stories and stuff on the iPad. So when he had the iPad, the picture, he would press it over, and I could tell when he would be nervous because or anxious because he would like listen to that story over and over again, like he was trying to like reassure himself. So I did something very similar, only I did mine with the iPad.
That's so funny. Our stories seem to be
Yeah,
overlapping heavily right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
So, one of the things that I hear some people say is that, some parents are worried that AAC might actually prevent their child from learning to speak, or that it's some sort of like a hindrance, that if we get our child, quote unquote, like hooked on the AAC device, that that'll stop them from ever being able to go beyond that and actually verbally communicate. So, what are your thoughts on that? Is there any research for or against this that you're aware of? Or I guess, what is your understanding of how that works?
That is the number one concern that I hear from parents. The number one, hands down, and why so many don't want to try AAC. But actually, AAC increases utterances because kids start putting more words together. I've seen kids say a word on a device and then they say a word. It also helps with like motor planning, so that communication becomes more natural. If they have a device, they get used to that. And it's like, for example, with my son, I didn't just have apple ball, that I made sentences. I had him, do short phrases, like do the motor programming. And so that when he started talking, that might be why he started talking in sentences. But I was thinking ahead. I'm like, okay, well, I know I'm believing my son is going to talk. I don't want him saying ball. This just labeling things. And so there's actually research with the American Speech Language Hearing Association, or ASHA, and even they report that AAC supports verbal speech and language development. It helps with written expression. And I could just speak for personal experience with my son. Like I said, my son was nonverbal until he was 5. I can identify with those parents that wonder, will my child ever talk? And he started talking right before he started kindergarten. And he was talking so well that most people found it hard to believe that he was nonverbal for like the first 5 years of his life. And the most important thing about AAC, and I touched on this earlier, is they just want to be acknowledged. It's so frustrating. You have all these thoughts, all these ideas, all these comments, and you can't get it out. Just acknowledging someone and letting them know you understand how they feel is huge. So every situation is different. I'm not saying that every child will use a communication device, they're going to start talking in sentences, but I can go from my personal experience that I know it works. I've seen it work with students, and I've seen it increase utterances. But that's the number one hurdle. I'll say I've had so many parents over the years, they're reluctant to try it because they think they're going to be limited. But now my son doesn't even need to use it. So it's not like a hindrance or they'll get hooked on it because he improved to the point where he doesn't even need to use it anymore.
Yeah, and I've seen similar, like we didn't use the high tech, we used low tech, but she doesn't need it anymore. She graduated beyond that. So definitely has been helpful for us. One other question that I have, and this is, you know, the lines in therapies now, like the metaphorical
Mhm.
lines that people are on, these like gigantic wait lists. Many of the places locally to where I'm at, there's like 2-year wait lists still for a lot of like speech language pathology and things like that, especially if you're like in a rural area where there's just not a lot of clinics. So servicing a lot of kids in 1 or 2 facilities. So I know that for us, at the beginning, we struggled with like, okay, well, what do we do in the meantime while we're on a wait list? And I wanted to ask you, like, while parents are on their wait list, are there some like practical ways that they can support AAC use at home, even if they're not able to work directly with a speech therapist?
Yes, and definitely start simple. And so you could take pictures around the house, starting with your child's preferred items. So, preferred food, toys, activities, print them out. Start with one picture, move up to two. You want to give your child choices because that helps with the communication. You could use the functional sign language. For me, having him sign more was one of the biggest ways my son was able to even communicate yes and no. Start a visual schedule, like writing down where you're going to go, take and like and also tying what I was saying. If you're going to be going somewhere, try to take pictures of it, explain it to your child. But the key, I think, is to start simple and start with the things that you have and start working on that. Reading books and going over the pictures. I think songs too. We used to do a lot of the nursery rhymes and songs on YouTube, and I think that played a major role too because he was taking all of that in.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. If you listen back to like season 1 of our podcast many years ago, that was the thing that we were touting. We're like, our kids sang before they spoke
Yes.
because they were listening to like super simple songs, which is very basic, like open, shut, things
Yeah.
like that. And I'm telling you, they were able to communicate with us through song before they even had any like spoken words. It was crazy. It actually worked really well. Was your child doing that by any chance?
Yes,
Like,
we
did
did
they
the
catch on
skipper.
to singing?
Yes, yes, he did that. And he had a fascination even from an early age of spelling. So this could be something you could do. I got those alpha tiles or alphabetic letters you put in the refrigerator. He used to amaze me with the things that he would spell and spelling names. And so, there's that he just amazes me every day. And I think, of course, this is just my personal theory from watching my son. I know being a delayed talker is a classic a trait with the autism. And from my son, it's my personal opinion, I think they're taking it all in. They're taking it all in. There's so many, and I think they're in, and then it just comes out. And also my son has a tendency to be a perfectionist, and I tell him all the time, I don't expect you to be perfect. I just expect you to try your best, and I think that might play a role. Trying to get it right, they not wanting to babble. I want to get this right, but I noticed that they take a lot of stuff in.
I feel like we could be talking about the same kid right now. Like, our kids are like twins. Also, that like super perfectionist thing. I will say though, because my kid also did the spelling thing, quite freaky when you're alone in your home. You have a child that you think cannot spell, and you walk into your room, and on the floor, in those little magnetic letters, my name is spelled on the floor. I walked into that, and she was like 2.5, and I was freaking out. That was creepy.
Yeah, my son was
Um,
about that age. We started spell. He was spelling before he was talking, and
yep.
it just shows you that it's there. It's just they need help, I guess, organizing and getting it out.
Yeah. It's just, do I believe it was them or a ghost? No, I'm just kidding. Um, so, the other issue that we run into is there are parents who maybe they're doing all this and they're doing everything right, but their child is resistant to using a device, or maybe they're resistant to using signs. I know for us, we definitely had issues with the picture system initially, and that's why we switched to hand signs. So what are some strategies that you think could help them engage more effectively with it?
Well, I think the most important thing is just to remember, is just keep with it, stay consistent. Be consistent with your routine because I know my son wouldn't be where he is today without early intervention. And I can empathize and I understand. I remember when it seemed like most of our free time was spent attending therapies, and it can seem endless at time, but know that it'll pay off down the road and don't give up. And I just be consistent because the biggest thing with autism is that repetition. So sometimes you may think that it's not going to work or it's not going to take, just keep trying. And like you said, if you're trying one certain thing, it doesn't work, try something else. But eventually there's going to be something they're going to take to, and they will amaze you. And so the most important thing is don't give up. I know it could be a lot. I've been there, but just know that those interventions and trying those different things, because my son, he said a few words here and there, but I mean, it was amazing when he started school. And another thing that a lot of people don't realize, when they hear the word nonverbal, they think that literally literally means that the child is not saying anything. You can be nonverbal and have a few words, but if you're not able to effectively communicate, then that's still under that is still considered being nonverbal, but just be consistent and just know that it's going to click, that it's going to work, and just you know try something else, try something different, but don't give up and be consistent with what you're doing.
Yeah, you mentioned that your son received, I think, OTPT and ST. Was he in all therapies?
Yes.
Essentially all of those
Yes.
therapies. And so he started that from an early age. So our kids had a ton of therapies too, and a lot of our parents do. So I was just wondering from your perspective, how did he manage to coordinate all of those therapies to make sure that they supported each other and weren't, I guess, kind of going against the grain, essentially?
So we had the therapist come into the house through early childhood intervention, and we also took them into like the therapy center. One of the things I recommend is we would do co-treats sometimes, and what that means is this could be the occupational therapist, the speech therapist, and I found that was very helpful because then the other therapists knew what they were working on. So we usually two, like you could do three, but I found it more successful with two. Like sometimes it'll be the speech and the OT or the speech and the PT. But I found that to be helpful when you have several different therapies to see if you could do a co-treat and have your child working with a couple of those therapists at the same time. Even when he was working on sensory with the hypotonia and with trying to get them to try new foods, the speech therapist and the OT did that. And so I think that that can be helpful so that it's overlapping and they know they're working on the same thing.
We did a little bit of that too with her, and that I thought that was amazing. Like I thought it was great because then you get two perspectives of things that overlap. Like we were just talking about, is this thing ST or OT? So if you have them both in the room, I think it's really like unique way of taking a look at what you're working with.
Mhm.
So another thing that I hear a bit is that parents feel overwhelmed by the number of therapies or services that their child
Mhm.
might end up needing. So what advice would you give to parents who might be feeling overwhelmed by all the therapies, and how do you feel they could best prioritize what's important?
So as far as I think all therapies are important. However, I am partial to the communication because when you child is not able to communicate, it can lead to communication breakdown and frustration and behaviors. And a lot of people don't realize that behaviors are communication. And so all the therapies are important, but definitely the communication piece and is important as well. And I just say try to take time for yourself. And also, one of the most important things is to celebrate the small things. It could be overwhelming. It's so easy to get discouraged, especially when you look around and you see other children and then you see your child and they're not making those same gains. But the thing is, just celebrate those small things. Like with my son, he was able to stand, celebrate that. He might not be walking yet, but he was able to stand. If my son was able to say a word after extensive like therapies, he might not be talking in sentences, but he's able to say a word. So it's essential to celebrate those small things and also remember to take time for yourself and know that it will pay off down the road because not only does my son talk, like I said, he doesn't have to wear the braces now. He can run, he can jump, he can climb. You would never know he even had to have early intervention. So try to look down the road and know that it will all pay off and that it will be worth it in the end.
And what would you say are some signs that perhaps a particular therapy or therapist might not be the right fit for your child? Because I know for us, we had some issues at the beginning with trying to find the right OT for her because sometimes she would just, come out more frustrated coming out than going in. So I was just wondering, is there any like telltale sign or like any way the parents can know, like, okay, this is definitely not going to work for us?
Definitely. Number one, if the therapist doesn't listen to you, if you don't feel heard, I believe that therapy should be collaborative and also they should thoroughly explain things to you so that you understand. And also, they should provide you with some techniques and ideas once they're gone. So, I feel if you don't feel like you're being heard, if they're not explaining to you so you understand, if they're not addressing your concerns, then I don't feel that it's the right fit because I went through that as well.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I've noticed is like, we as parents, we're bringing our kids to all these therapies. We're overwhelmed if we're seeing progress, not seeing progress. What you mentioned about kind of seeing our kids compared to other kids. And, it can kind of take an emotional toll. So, how do you, as a parent, basically stay motivated and positive, even when the progress that you're seeing might be slow or it might feel really challenging?
Well, I can tell you what helped me, and this was so helpful with me with my son in the beginning is I have the advantage. I currently work in the high school setting and I work with children with autism, with teens with autism at all different levels. And what was motivating for me is I would see some of my students, some in all regular classes, minimal support, and or just all different levels. And what was motivating for me is I would think to myself, what were they like when they were my son's age? And that provided a lot of encouragement for me. If you could just try to think to the future that you know it's going to get better, that this is where they're at now, but this doesn't mean that it's where they stay. And if you meet adults with autism, just know that everyone had to start somewhere. And that was motivating for me, knowing all the things that I was doing. And then one day it just clicked. And I've seen that happen so many times. You could do all these therapies. It could seem so endless. And will my child talk? Will my child do these things? And one day it'll just click and your child will amaze you.
I want to talk about something you mentioned there a little bit. So you talked about, what you're doing in schools. Schools is an area that I have found has been challenging for parents who I have talked to about
Yes.
AAC. I know some parents have had a really hard time getting the school to approve AAC, or even if it's approved, there's like a huge delay before they can get the AAC or other communication tools. What advice do you give to parents who are struggling to get that support for their child in a school setting?
Well, one of the things is if their child has an IEP, you can call an IEP to get everyone on board. And develop a plan. And also, I recommend getting an educational advocate. Educational advocates will attend the meetings with you. They'll support you, help you develop a plan ahead of time. And I think that that's the best plan. And I even have advocates with me that go to meetings and things because even though I'm an SLP, I'm mom when I step into those meetings. And I feel that that's the best way to get everyone on board. I have also and I'm an SLP. I have had issues with that. My son, when he started one of the preschools, he had a communication device. They refused to use it because they said it was too distracting to the other students because he was STEM and he would press like one of the buttons over and over. And so they're like, well, would you be open to using some other forms of communication? I said, oh, yeah, that's great. Well, I didn't know that was their way of saying that they weren't going to use it. And then they were wondering why he had behavior. So I am in the field and even I struggle with that. And so my best advice to parents is that IEP is to be driving your child's education. When you call those IEPs, make sure you have everyone in the room, make sure that you're developing a plan. And I definitely highly recommend having an educational advocate, which most states have those and they're free. And so that's a support system for you that you can lean on to help you navigate these meetings, because even though I'm in the field, I still need help with that as well.
So despite, the challenges with communication, how do you help him build his confidence and his sense of identity as an autistic person, even though, he's had all these challenges growing up?
Well, one of the things with him that I did is I told him that he had autism at an early age because I wanted him to hear it from me. I didn't want him to hear it from anyone else. And I tell him that he's smart, he's brilliant, he's amazing. I let him know that his autism makes him special, that it's a part of him. And I tell him all the time, I said, you're going to invent something that doesn't exist yet. And one of the things I remember I have framed in his room, he had the Tech Guru Award when he was in kindergarten. And I say one day, I said, people are going to say you were a genius even in kindergarten. So I don't look at autism as something to associate with something negative. I celebrate it all the time and I talk with him about it. If there's certain things that he does, I say, this is because you're autism. I just try to give him a different perspective, say this is because you're autism, that perspective taking, but this is how someone else may see this situation.
And then when it comes to AAC, what is one realistic goal that parents can have for kids who are nonverbal or have limited speech? And on the flip side of that, what is a mistake that you've seen being used with AAC?
Well, I can start with the mistake, and the biggest mistake is going straight to that high tech. What's essential with AAC, you want to start with the low tech, with the picture cards, with the choices, seeing that they can make that that they understand that before going to the high tech. Even I didn't go straight to the communication device. And what happens so many times when you go straight to that communication device, then you have a child a lot of times is not motivated to use it, or teachers say, oh, they don't even use it, it just sits over there. Well, it has to be meaningful to them in order for them to use it. And as far as like with just like simple tips, like I said, start simple, giving your child choices, having that visual schedule, taking pictures ahead of time, letting them know what to expect. Just start simple. But I can't tell you how many times teachers or your parents or whoever, oh, not so much parents, more so teachers, oh, so and so doesn't use that device, it just sits over there. Well, yeah, did you jump straight to the device? Another mistake I see is they're not picking the right type of AAC device, the right type of app. There's so many different kinds. And actually, it's a better idea too, which I do all the time at my district, is you can trial items from the state. So I will actually trial items and let the student use it for a number of weeks to even see if it will be a fit. So you want to take it slow. You want to see if the child is able to use that low tech first before making that jump, because some students might stick with the low tech, and there's also low tech devices that I've used with many students. And so that's the thing that's the number one thing, is making that jump straight to that communication device. And if you do that, oftentimes it just sits there and the student's not motivated to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I want to wrap with here is asking you, our podcast is called Embracing Autism, and it means something a little bit different for everyone. So, what does the phrase or the concept of embracing autism mean to you personally?
Well, I would like to think of my son with embracing autism. What it means to me is accepting my son for who he is, not trying to change him, and celebrating his autism and knowing that it makes him special. And I appreciate the way he sees the world in such a unique way, and he amazes me every day.
That's so sweet. So, where can our listeners find you? Do you have a website or any sort of online presence?
Yes, I do. So I have a blog, theartyslp.com, where I write about autism, AAC, and speech therapy. I have Pinterest, where I have different pins, and also I have a TPT store, the Artsy SLP.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been an insightful conversation. I really like how you've shared not just your professional experience, but also that personal side to your journey as a parent navigating all of this. And I want to thank you again for giving our listeners practical tools, because the stuff you're talking about, they can start using today. And for all of you out there tuning in, just remember every child's communication journey is unique and progress comes in many forms. So keep advocating, keep learning, and most importantly, keep embracing autism. Thanks, Marisa.
Thank you.
Bye.